All right, let's dive deep into FHIR servers. We're taking a closer look today at this excerpt. It gets into the nitty-gritty of what's really going on with these systems. And, well, it's saying that maybe they're not as simple to just plug in and play as some of these cloud providers might want us to believe.
Yeah, for sure. What really got me thinking about this source was the argument that FHIR servers, they're often presented as ready-made solutions, like you can just grab them and go. But actually, to make them work in healthcare, in the real world, you need a good amount of, well, customization. It's not quite as straightforward as it seems.
Yeah. So that's where this idea of an intercept layer comes in.
Right.
Like that's what this source is really focused on. To be honest, it sounds a bit technical, maybe even a little intimidating. So before we jump into the details, could you maybe break it down for us? Like, what exactly is a FHIR server, especially for those who might not be totally familiar with all this?
Definitely. You got it. In the simplest terms, think of a FHIR server as a kind of database, but it's designed specifically for healthcare information. It uses the standard called Fast Healthcare Interoperability Resources, that's FHIR, to store and manage all that sensitive data. And it does it in a way that's, well, consistent and organized. It keeps things structured.
Okay, so we've got these FHIR servers handling this super important health data, but this source is saying just having the server itself isn't enough, right? You need this intercept layer on top of that. It's like, it gets interesting here.
Exactly. The intercept layer, it's like, imagine a gatekeeper. It sits right in front of your FHIR server, and every request that comes in, well, it has to go through this layer first before it even gets to the server. This is what gives developers the ability to add all kinds of essential customizations and control what's going on.
I see. And the source actually lays out like 8 specific reasons why this layer is so important. Let's break them down one by one. I think that would be super helpful for everyone listening. The first one they mention is operations. Can you help me understand what they mean by that?
Sure. Okay, so every FHIR server right out of the box comes with a certain set of capabilities, things it can do. But think about it. What if you need it to do something specific that's not included in those basic functions? That's where the intercept layer steps in. Developers can write custom code to handle those unique situations, basically expanding what the server can do. It's like giving it extra tools, to do even more.
Gotcha. So it's not just about what the server can do by default, but making it do exactly what you need for your specific situation. Okay, I like that. Another reason they mentioned is validation. Now, this seems super important when we're talking about healthcare, right?
Absolutely. Imagine, for example, a doctor is entering a patient's medication dosage and they make a mistake. A simple typo. Well, that could be a big problem. The intercept layer is there to prevent those kinds of errors. It enforces data validation rules, so before the data is saved to the server, it's like a double check to make sure everything is accurate and makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. It reminds me of those online forms where, if you don't fill in a required field or you type something that's not formatted correctly, it won't let you submit it. But this is for something way more important, obviously, health data. All right, next on the list are version IDs and provenance. Now, I'm curious about these. What do those mean in this context?
These are all about keeping a clear and auditable history of your data. So with version IDs, every time a change is made to a record, it gets tracked, a new ID. This way you can always see the complete history of how the data evolved over time. And then there's provenance. That's all about knowing the origin of the data, like where it came from, who entered it, who made changes to it. You can think of it almost like a digital paper trail, but for every piece of information.
Ah, that's clever. No more mystery about who changed what and when. Got it. Next, we have audit events. This sounds like, well, I guess a security you must have.
Oh, you're absolutely right. It's crucial for security. Audit events basically create a log of everything that happens on the server. It's like having a detailed record of every action, who accessed the data, what data they looked at, when they did it, what they did with it. This is huge for, things like complying with those privacy regulations and making sure everyone is accountable for their actions.
Okay, so let me see if I've got this right. So far, we've talked about customizing how the server works, validating data to make sure it's accurate, tracking the history of all the data changes, and keeping these super detailed security logs. But there's more, right? I see the source also mentions blocking access. What's the importance of that?
Right, so we have all this data on the FHIR server, but not everyone should be able to see everything, right? That's where blocking access comes in. The intercept layer can act like a bouncer, basically. It enforces access control rules so that sensitive patient information is only viewable by the people who are authorized to see it. This is critical for protecting privacy and making sure everything stays in line with regulations like IPA.
Of course. It's like you don't want just anyone peeking into those sensitive health records. Makes perfect sense. All right, the source then goes on to mention a few more things that, to be honest, sound a bit more on the technical side. Conditional requests, altering requests, and altering responses. Can you give us, I don't know, maybe a quick overview of those?
Sure, no problem. So, conditional requests give you the ability to control how data is updated. For example, you could set a rule that says a record can only be updated if certain conditions are met. This helps prevent accidental overwrites or changes that shouldn't be happening.
So it's like adding a layer of intelligence to how the data is managed.
Yeah.
Interesting. What about altering requests and responses?
Those features are all about, well, imagine you need to modify the format of the data coming in or going out of the server, and you need to do it right then and there, on the fly. It's like having a built-in translator that can convert the data into different formats as needed. This is super helpful when you have to integrate your FHIR server with other systems that might be using different ways of structuring their data.
It's fascinating how all these different functions come together to make the FHIR server so adaptable. It can be customized to work with various systems and meet all sorts of different needs, and it really drives home the point that this source was making. FHIR servers aren't just something you plug in and forget about. There's a lot of thought and customization needed behind the scenes to make sure the data is accurate, secure, and in the end, that patient safety is never compromised.
Exactly. I think it's easy to get caught up in the marketing hype sometimes, when they tell you it's an out-of-the-box solution. But, as we've seen in this deep dive, the reality is a bit more complex. This Intercept layer, it might be kind of invisible to the average user, but it's playing a vital role in making sure those FHIR servers are actually ready for the demands of the real world.
So everyone listening, if you were thinking about setting up a FHIR server, what would you ask the vendors about their Intercept layer? Like, how much control do you have over it? How easy is it to customize? What about the security measures they have in place? Those are some things to think about.
And here's something else to ponder. We've seen how powerful and flexible this Intercept layer can be, but it also introduces another layer of complexity. So how do you manage all that customization? How do you make sure the code itself is secure and reliable? These are some crucial questions to consider as you navigate the world of FHIR servers.